So up until now, I've talked pretty generally about different types of independence movements. And we want to bear in mind that these movements were all different in their own way. But I want to look at two case studies with India and South Africa. India was one of the first colonies to achieve independence, and India really provided a model and inspiration for the rest of the colonial world. One of the countries that India inspired was South Africa. And if India was one of the first former European colonies to gain independence, South Africa was really the last. India is the name commonly given to the South Asian Peninsula. So this is a huge area, bigger than the country of India today. And in the South Asian Peninsula, there's never really been just one cultural identity. There's different castes, different languages, different tribes, different religions. And for most of world history, India has been politically fragmented. Lots of small civilizations, not a unified civilization. There have been times throughout history where a big part of the Indian subcontinent had been unified in one empire. The Mauryan Empire, the Gupta Empire, the Mughal Empire. All of these brought a big chunk of India under one political system. But none of these empires brought uniformity or one cultural identity to India. These were always sort of overlays placed on top of diverse civilizations, and when the British came, they ruled like this as well. But in sort of a weird way, British rule actually helped create a sense of common Indian identity. For the first time in India, people thought of themselves as Indians. Part of the reason is that British really kept themselves separate from Indian society, racially and culturally. So there wasn't a lot of exchange. People in India certainly had more in common with each other culturally than they did with the British. The British also really built up the infrastructure of the country and connected the different regions of India, and did this through things like railroads, telegraphs, postal service, newspapers. All of these things brought the country closer together. And finally, India is a region with countless languages, and English was the language of the British government, of the colonial government, so more and more people learned to speak the same language. In 1885, a group of Indian professionals, these are people that had been educated in Great Britain, people that came from high caste Hindu families, go on to create the Indian National Congress. The initial goal of the INC wasn't the overthrow of the British in India. It was just to give more inclusion to Indians in government, in the military, in the business world, all within the context of British India. The Indian National Congress viewed themselves as the protectors of the interests of Indians, and they spoke on behalf of Indians. At first, the INC had a hard time really getting the support of the masses, but this would change after World War I. Great Britain drew upon soldiers from all of its colonies, and Great Britain told the Indian public that if they fought for Great Britain in the war, then Britain would gradually turn their government over to Indians, and Indians could control the government for themselves. But after World War I, this didn't seem to be happening. Instead, the British seemed to be cracking down on demands for independence. And it's in this historical context in which Mohandas Gandhi arrives on the scene in India. Gandhi was born in Western India. He's part of the Vaisya caste, which was the business caste. Gandhi was privileged, but when he was a student in India, he was just sort of an average student. Because he was privileged, though, he was given the opportunity to study in Britain when he turned 18. In Britain, Gandhi trained to be a lawyer. In 1893, Gandhi goes on to accept a job in South Africa with an Indian law firm. Now, when Gandhi's in South Africa, he grows a lot more politically conscious than he ever has been before. This is because in South Africa, he experiences a lot of racism, more racism than he'd experienced in Great Britain, and certainly more racism than he'd experienced in colonial India. And it's here in South Africa that Gandhi really develops his philosophy of nonviolent resistance. The idea that a person can bring about political and social change not through violent revolution, but through nonviolent passive resistance. If a government is continually cracking down on people who aren't fighting back, then eventually that government or the military is going to have to look at themselves in the mirror and ask themselves, what are they doing? But Gandhi never supported using violence as a tool for political change. So Gandhi will eventually come back to India, and in the 1920s and 1930s, Gandhi applies his philosophy of nonviolence in an effort to gain independence for India from the British Empire. And Gandhi was key to Indian independence because he was somebody that appealed to a wide range of Indians. He really seemed to be able to bring people together. So what do we know about India? It's a very diverse country, doesn't have a long history of unification, but people from diverse groups flock to Gandhi. Poor, the rich, capitalists, socialists, Hindus, Muslims. He really had this power of bringing people together. Gandhi's belief was that India was one nation. He thought that India should shun industrialization and modernization and instead pursue small scale, self sufficient villages based on agriculture and based on ancient Indian principles. Modernization, according to Gandhi, wasn't bringing any good to India. It was just making people more competitive, more materialistic, and this was all coming at the expense of traditional values. But one thing that endeared Gandhi to so many people was that he practiced what he preached. He lived a really simple lifestyle, he wore simple clothes, ate simple food, and on top of that, he advocated for the rights of oppressed people in India. Muslims were a large minority in India, and Gandhi supported Muslim rights. Gandhi worked to raise the status of the untouchables, who were the lowest caste Hindus, according to the caste system. He challenged the divisions of the caste system, but at the same time, he often laced his speeches with reference to themes that were popular in Hindu religion. But more than his philosophies, it was his actions that made Gandhi popular. And in the fight for independence from the British, Gandhi participated in a lot of acts of civil disobedience against the British government. One of the most famous acts of civil disobedience was the Salt March, and this was a protest to the British salt tax. And the British salt tax essentially made it illegal for an Indian person to make or sell salt, so the British Empire had a total monopoly on the production and sale of salt. In 1930, Gandhi left on a march with a small group of supporters, and they walked for 23 days straight to the Indian Ocean. And once they got there, they started making salt. And along the way, Gandhi and his supporters passed villages, and he spoke to villagers about what they were doing and the message they were spreading. And Gandhi was ultimately arrested for this, and Gandhi's arrest and imprisonment led to mass protests around India. And there was another march, and this time Gandhi was in prison. It was his supporters that were marching, and there was a brutal crackdown on the march. But Gandhi's supporters didn't fight back. They believed in the philosophy of nonviolent resistance. So you have a situation where many people are being beaten to death and they aren't fighting back. But in the eyes of the world really embraced these people, these protesters, and they condemned the violence against them. And this is one of the big reasons why India was able to get its independence from Great Britain. Because Great Britain was really forced to look at themselves and ask themselves what they were doing there. Despite Gandhi's support, there were still divisions within India. The other leaders of the INC saw Gandhi as a great man and a valuable leader, but the other leaders wanted modernization. So we have this conflict between those who want to modernize and those who want to follow Gandhi's vision. There is a militant wing in the INC that wants to create a Hindu nation. Some of the leaders of the INC were opposed to improving the rights of women and the rights of lower caste people in India. All of these things threatened Indian independence, but the biggest conflict in India was between Hindus and Muslims. So, just backtracking a bit, in 1906, Muslim leaders in India formed the All Indian Muslim League. The Indian National Congress presented themselves as leaders who spoke for all Indians, and the Muslim League formed and basically said, no, you don't speak for us, you speak for the Hindus. The position of the Muslim leaders is that they would be dominated by the Hindus, and despite the fact that Gandhi supported Muslim rights, they knew that not all members of the INC were like Gandhi. In 1937, the British turned over control of some of the local governments to the INC, and this is where the conflict between Hindus and Muslims in India really came to a head. Some of the actions of the INC in these new locally INC controlled areas offended Muslims. One thing the INC did was enforce the teaching of Hindu in schools. Another thing the INC did was ban the slaughter of cows. So things like this really made the Muslim population upset. The leader of the Muslim League was Muhammad Ali Jinnah, and he argued that the parts of India where it was mostly Muslim people that lived should form a separate country, and this country should be called Pakistan, meaning the land of the pure. Gandhi argued that India was a single nation. Jinnah disagreed. Jinnah wasn't hostile towards Gandhi, but he didn't think the two countries or the two religions could coexist. And his beliefs are summed up with this following quote: Muslims and Hindus belong to two different religious philosophies, social customs, and literatures. They neither intermarry nor interdine together, and indeed, they belong to two different civilizations. Following World War II, the British announced that they would indeed be leaving India. Under pressure from the Muslim community, Gandhi and the INC reluctantly agreed to partition, to separate India into two countries. So British India became independent in 1947 as two countries. One country was Muslim, and this country comprised two wings 1,000 miles apart. This country was Pakistan, or the land of the pure. The other country was India. The religion of most people in India was Hindu, but the government would be secular. This division of India was very painful. There were mass migrations of Hindu people living in predominantly Muslim areas, moving to Hindu areas. Muslim people living in predominantly Hindu areas, moving to Pakistan. So this was a messy breakup. 12 million refugees, over 1 million people were killed. And Gandhi will not go on to become the Prime Minister of India, or the first Prime Minister of India. That position will go to Nehru, a close associate of Gandhi and member of the INC, but somebody that promoted industrialization and modernization. Gandhi himself refuses to attend India's independence celebrations in 1947 in protest to the violence between Muslims and Hindus. And in 1948, Gandhi was assassinated by a Hindu extremist.